Whenever I feel down or just generally depressed, I think to myself, at least I'm not David Cameron. You know, they say never kick a man while he's down, but you forget that the rest of the phrase is, except if they've screwed up the country.
I've decided the right thing to do is to stand down.
David Cameron has his memoirs coming out. I'm sure they will be a riveting read. But I want to have my own thoughts, my own memoirs, if you like, of David Cameron and why he's the worst Prime Minister for a very long time. Some of you will be going, what about Margaret Thatcher? Not a big fan of her, are you? Trashed industry, mass unemployment, the massive social dislocation that we still suffer from today. So what I mean is a failure on his own terms. That's the point. So Margaret Thatcher, not a big fan of her, am I? Or her policies, but she transformed the country. She created this whole new political settlement. She forced her opponents to accept everything that she did.
The Iron Lady of the Western world.
She achieved a huge amount. Not stuff I want, but it was still successful on her own terms. David Cameron, though, blimey. When David Cameron was running to be Conservative leader, he wanted to be a new type of Conservative leader. Do you remember that? He did this speech in 2005, those heady days, and he said, and let's resolve here at this conference, when we put defeat behind us, failure behind us, to look ourselves in the eye and say, never, ever again. For him, it's been quite the failure. His economic record, his government pledged...
The structural current deficit should be in balance in the final year of the 5-year forecast period, which is 2015-16 in this budget.
They didn't eradicate the deficit in one parliamentary term, because as you probably all noticed, Britain still has a whopping great deficit because their economic policies failed. They added more debt than every single Labour government put together in history. They had the weakest economic growth since the 19th century, the longest fall in living standards since the 19th century. Of all these so-called OECD countries, their advanced economies, Britain had the worst fall in wages of any country apart from Greece. That's how bad their policies were. So after the last general election, George Osborne, do you remember him? Ooh. And he had 3 fiscal rules, and these were the fiscal rules. A welfare cap, a national debt falling as a proportion of GDP, and a budget surplus by 2020. Those are these 3 cast iron rules. The first 2 were broken by March, so that was a few months after the general election. And then the budget surplus at the end of July, poof, gone. As soon as George Osborne stood down, his own allies like Sajid Javid were calling for a big fiscal stimulus, abandoning instantly the whole mantra of cuts. So much misery, and for what? What about education? That was one of their flagship reforms. So in 2005, when David Cameron was standing to become leader, he said, we've got to win the great debate about education in this country, to give choice to parents, freedom to schools, and to fight for high standards. Firstly, if you look at, for example, academies, the mass kind of introduction of academies across the country, a recent league table found that local authority schools overall are outperforming the government's flagship academies. Another failure. Something else he wanted to lay to the rest was the integrity of the United Kingdom, that he would permanently settle the debate on the issue of Scotland and independence.
Please, don't lose faith in what this country is.
And come up with a United Kingdom that was genuinely united. Well, okay, yeah, he won the referendum, but at what cost? The Scottish National Party obliterated all of its opposition, winning 56 out of 59 seats, and almost certainly independence will happen within a generation, unless there's a dramatic turnaround in fortunes.
The option of a second referendum must be on the table.
The idea we have a United Kingdom and Scotland is more disconnected from the so-called United Kingdom than it's ever been since the modern UK was founded. Well, everyone will look back at his premiership and see, well, that's what caused it. Foreign policy. David Cameron's most striking contribution to foreign policy was, of course, the war in Libya. Just after David Cameron announced he was standing down, the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee decided to give him a parting gift. And that was a report which blamed David Cameron for the calamitous collapse of Libya and the rise of ISIS. Well, we've all got our foibles, haven't we? Who hasn't helped lay the foundations for the rise of a murderous terrorist group? What the report said is it lacked accurate intelligence and a coherent strategy for the aftermath for removing the dictator. Because what happened in Libya? Well, firstly, we were told there'd be an imminent
Bloody massacre in Benghazi.
The House of Commons Parliamentary Committee suggests that was actually overstated. But in any case, within 24 hours of the strikes taking place, Benghazi was protected. But then the campaign turned not into what, a mission to defend Benghazi, it became regime change. And what happened in the aftermath of that was attacks and massacres of black Libyans, the destabilisation of places like Mali because guns suddenly were awash across North Africa, the collapse of Libya into armed warfare, turning it into what people are saying increasingly is the Somalia on the Med, and of course the rise of ISIS not that far away from Europe. Now some might be thinking, you're being a bit harsh. What about, equal marriage, Owen? You're big gay. You've benefited from that. Well, I haven't got married, obviously. Now, true, equal marriage was something which I think was courageously won through the House of Commons. I'm going to add two striking caveats, though. Firstly, it was only won off the back of Labour and Lib Dem MPs because most Conservative MPs either voted against or abstained. But here's the tragedy, and I found this astonishing. This one big shining achievement, and if I were him, I'd be clinging onto it like a life raft. But apparently, according to a David Cameron supporting writer, who's an excellent writer, Matthew Dancona, he regretted the achievement. Apparently he said it just caused too much uproar. It wasn't worth the fuss. But of course, the cherry on top was the EU referendum. He said he wanted the Conservative Party to stop banging on about Europe. Well, that's all we'll all be doing for the next few years.
We must leave the European Union.
Leave the European Union. Brexit negotiations.
People want to know what Brexit will mean.
Brexit means Brexit.
Banging on about Europe is now a national pastime thanks to David Cameron.
Right.
David Cameron called the referendum not because he thought, we need to solve this as a country or the rest. It was just a means of managing internal party divisions. And it was daft because what he did for years, for example, so he set a cap on immigration.
Immigration will be at levels our country can manage. No ifs, no buts.
That didn't achieve its goals. All that did is undermine people's faith in politicians, which was already very low, and in democracy, because you got these targets set on immigration, they were massively exceeded. That made people even angrier. He would say things about immigration which were quite stigmatising.
They met with a bunch of migrants in Calais. They said they could all come to Britain.
And talk about need to control the borders, all the rest of it, whilst at the same time failing to do so. As part of his negotiation with the European Union, he made it clear that Britain would be happy to leave. He said Britain would do fine outside the European Union. So then during the referendum campaign, to switch from that to blood-curdling prophecies of
A DIY recession.
Well, it didn't look credible, did it, at all? Because people said, well, you were saying we'd do all right, and now you're saying World War III will happen and the economy will collapse.
The shock to our economy after leaving Europe would tip the country into recession.
They say that all political careers end in failure. That's true, but what a failure. Having to stand down because the electorate personally repudiate you after you put your entire career, not just your entire career, your entire government's legacy on the back of a referendum, which you then lose at. It was a calamity for David Cameron and for his premiership. He'll just be remembered as a man who risked everything on a referendum which he thought would solve his own internal party machinations, which in the end caused the biggest crisis that this country has faced since 1945. What do you reckon? Am I being overly harsh on our toppled Prime Minister? He's now scuttled out of the House of Commons. Do you think actually his premiership is a great success? And, look, at least he became Prime Minister, and you'll just hear whinging about him on a YouTube channel. Valid criticism, to be honest. But I want to hear your thoughts. What are your low points for him? What are your high points for him? Are you going to miss him? David Cameron? Maybe you will. Some might. So I want to hear your thoughts. Leave your comments, as ever. Subscribe. I will see you next time.